Okay, everybody, we're back from our commercial break. I'm here with my co-hosts again, Chris Torres and Dave Funnel. Guys, I just had Jeff Fletcher on, and it was a wonderful interview interrupted by Arizona Heat. We had a little bit of a break there before we were able to finish the interview, but how are you guys doing tonight?
I'm good. I'm doing all right.
You don't sound so sure.
Uh, I've had a week at work, but I'm happy to be here with you guys to talk all about baseball. So I'm good.
For sure. Torres, how about you, man? How are you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. I'm ready for you guys to pick apart my Tout Wars team, my main event team, tell you how crappy they are. So I'm just gearing up. I'm just gearing up to get ripped apart.
Quite honestly, I don't think that there's a lot to tear apart there. I mean, I think you did some really good things, and the more I thought about what I thought your draft philosophy was in both of those, the more I really liked it for what it's worth. And so I don't, unlike you, I'm a positive person, and so I'm not here to tear others down like you are when you're not doing therapy.
Right. I'm so
asking
positive.
me what I'm thinking about Andrew Benintendi, who actually played today, dude. So like. Things are looking up, man. Things are looking up.
There you go, man. All right. I like it.
I'm just kidding, you guys. Hey, it's great to be on with you. It has been a heck of a week. We know that we always have this towards the end of our week to be able to kind of hopefully ground us and talk a little bit about baseball, the things that we love, and take our minds off of work and family and all the other things that we got going on. We have a special guest with us, a second special guest with us tonight that's on. The only Angels fan that I know. I don't really know. I was thinking about this earlier, and I don't really know any other Angels fans, or maybe it's just that I don't know anybody else who would admit to being an Angels fan. But with us tonight is Dan Prepas. He is also known on X with one of the greatest Twitter handles of all time at Surly Attorney. He's anything but surly. I was able to meet him in Arizona this past year at First Pitch. Really great guy. Dan, thanks for joining us tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm a little sad that I didn't get to talk to Jeff Fletcher. I mean, that's like the ultimate Homer starstruckness, but I'll have to reach out to him another time.
Yeah, he was great. And he, obviously there's nobody who knows more about the Angels than he does. And he shared some really great insights in the first part of the show. But Dan, we wanted to ask you a few questions on our follow-up segment about the Angels. What do you think about the season outlook for these guys? I mean, is this a team that can compete as constructed in a very tough American League West division?
Okay, so I'm going to come at this a different angle. Absolutely not. There's no reason to expect them to have a winning record. I mean, when we expected them to have a winning record, they didn't do it. All that being said, the benefit is there's a lot of question marks. Does Adele take the next step? Does Ohapi take the next step? Mm-hmm. Can Trout stay healthy for more than a month? Even if we get half a year from him, that's pretty good. Can Detmers all of a sudden flip the other way? So I kind of embrace the unknown with it, Mike, as if to say maybe unlike in years past, they do have a lot of talent with a lot of question marks, TBD. Does Neto come back? Does he repeat? So I'm embracing the unknowns as far as the team goes. And hey, Kikuchi was, I think, one of our better signings. Certainly a number of years, and underlying skills. So I'm a little bit more optimistic, but I think that's because I finally, like most Angel fans, accepted that this team is, gone through a lot of pain, and there's no reason for us to expect anything different. But we do have homegrown talent. So there's the optimism with that.
Well, Jeff was really, I don't want to say excited, but he pointed out in the early part of the interview that he felt that the Angels really had 6 starters for 5 positions, and that obviously the Kikuchi signing was a big one for them. He really was very high on Soriano. He's actually tweeted and talked about Kyle Hendricks looking perhaps to be resurgent. And we talked about Reed Detmers as being a guy that's not really met his potential yet, but only being 25 and what that might look like. And he seemed to think that they might have 6 guys for 5 spots. So you got that going for you. At least that's better than being a White Sox fan. Dave, you had a question you wanted to ask Dan. Why don't you take that next one?
Yeah, because you did say that there were a lot of questions heading into this year, but I think the biggest question there really is Mike Trout. What are your thoughts on him for this year, and what do you think his fantasy value will be?
Well, I think we definitely saw probably the lowest draft spot ever early in the season when he was going as late as 130 to 150.
Yeah.
I mean, shoot, even if he only has one good month this year, he'll probably still not go lower than that the next year. So the price, even with the natural bump of him being healthy, I'm assuming he's going to go anywhere from about 80 to 100 in the big week of drafts. It's a value. Certainly more valuable in a fab league. I would say that is the speed going to be there? Maybe, right? The power's definitely going to be there. He wasn't really. He hit 220 last year, but that was not enough ABs for that to regress out the other way. So every day that he's healthy is another day to expect him to be a player that can easily hit 260 to 270 with 40 home runs. With 500 PAs, he's going to get 40 home runs. That's the one part of the profile that's there. We'll see, but I think it's the same thing as every year. It's a little disconcerting that his knee didn't get better at all. You can have hope with the surgery, but I think I said to somebody else, it's almost a mirror image of the second half of Ken Griffey Jr.'s career. So maybe we get one spike year, a lot of guys that were on their last leg. So I think that's really the hope with Mike is, can we get a spike year? Can we get him to be healthy this year? And again, question mark. I just have no clue. There's no reports of him having any limitations. So you just cross your fingers, hope and pray. And you're just grateful for every week that there's, no problems with health. But I think at this point, we've all expected that at any given moment, you'll just hear Mike Trout, calf, Mike Trout, hamstring, quad. It can come at any moment, and it's not going to come with a warning at this point. So
yeah, and that's the thing with him too, is that once he does get hurt, it will take a while, I think, for him to come back. But like you said, though, when he's on the field, he's elite. So as long as he's on the field, I think it's a pretty good bet to draft him. But I'd feel a lot safer in leagues where I could, if I had IL spots or something like that. But
definitely. But to that point, everybody knows that power is at least one of the more scarce commodities, certainly after you get to the top 50 picks. So you're not getting anybody in that range that can hit you 40 home runs. And I think that's the question you have to ask yourself, whether it's multiple teams. Look at the player pool. How many guys from pick 100 to let's say 100 to 200 can realistically get you 40 home runs with 3/4 of a season? Yeah, you can't find one. You can't find one. So you have multiple leagues. It's definitely worth the gamble. And I suspect this coming weekend, my gut says that he does not make it past. I bet the latest he goes is like 85. Because if you've got sharp drafters there, for the most part, they're not just doing one league. And if somebody's seeing Mike Trout and has the right build there in the fifth round, even or sixth round, I don't even think it's a bad pick in the fifth round, quite frankly, with the other hitters there. So that's my take on it.
Do you have any shares?
Me?
Yeah,
I got a couple. But I'm purposely trying to get as few shares as possible to help do my part in keeping him healthy for the full year.
Okay, gotcha. That is very kind of you. All right, you mentioned Yusei Kikuchi earlier, and you said that you liked his signing, and I agree, man. Like I really like him as a pitcher based on the skills that he showed the past few years. I was a little disappointed he ended up with the Angels, and I think the fantasy community at large was a little disappointed because you saw his ADP in that like 130 to 140 range at the beginning of draft season, and that's gone down since. And I took him in my main, which we'll talk about later, a little later than that. But yeah, it just seems like he's kind of flying under the radar because of the landing spot. But where are you on Kikuchi? I mean, do you think let's talk about it mainly from a fantasy perspective. Like, is he someone that you find is a target for you, or where do you
Yes.
stand with him?
Yes. And I noticed early in draft season, Torres, he was closer to like 140, 150. I mean, I haven't sorted the data.
Mhm.
And it seems like he really started to fade, maybe as other guys were getting hype, camp reports, or things like that. So it kind of feels like between 150 and 200. I'm guessing you took him around 175. I haven't looked at your team.
Yeah, like I pushed him up a little bit. I think I got him around like closer to 160.
Yeah, anywhere 150 to 200, I was going to say is fine. But he's got more K upside, decent whip. The skills are there for him to return a lot of value. And, you know, the best way when people ask me questions about Angels fantasy hitters is take the narrative discount. Take the Angels suck. People hate on the Angels. Take that discount because the team context is obviously not great for runs and RBIs. And certainly for pitchers, you know, it's become a little bit more of a hitter's park. But when you've got night games in Southern California, ball's not going to travel that far. You know, that's a bigger deal, I think, than park factors. And, you know, Kikuchi will have his blow-up games, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to expect him to have an ERA. I kind of have him in an ERA around 3.7, 3.8, with more than a K per inning. I'm sure you have something similar. So I really think that he's going to return value easily. He's gotten better each year, and you know, take the discount. Because my question to you would be, if you saw those skills on, say, the Mariners or the Astros, what do you think the draft price would be?
Absolutely. It's way different. And I think the one thing that people have to kind of remember is that with Kikuchi going to Houston in the middle of the season last year, he completely changed his pitch mix when he got there. The pitching staff down there, the pitching coaches down there are really, really good at unlocking these guys' potential. And so you had a guy in Kikuchi who essentially doubled his slider usage from July to September, cut the four seam usage and made it a better pitch for him, but cut it by 20% down to something different, you know, to 36% or whatever it was, and started using his curveball just a little bit more to kind of mix it in. And the mix really worked for him. And so I think the Angels are hoping, as Jeff said that today, the Angels are really hoping that will work for him and that he will be able to continue those gains. He is their opening day starter and he is their ace. And so that's what they're paying him to be. And we'll see how that works out. Dan, you brought up talking a little bit about hitters before. I wanted to ask your take on one of the guys that I was interested in talking to Jeff about, and you as well, is Joe Adell. I was wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit about your thoughts on Joe Adell and where he's going and whether you're in on him or not. And also Logan O'Hoppe, who is a bit of a divisive player in fantasy baseball.
Okay, I'll start with Adele first. If you just look at the stats and the metrics and you don't look at anything else, he's underpriced because on that team he's going to run. And here's the key. If he gets the playing time, I think he can very easily get 20-20 and maybe even 30-20. So there's no question with the playing time, he's going to return value. And quite frankly, if he's not on that pace, you don't have to worry about starting him. The playing time will die off. So you just need kind of minimal competence on the average level. You know, there's nothing to suggest if he keeps his head on straight that he can't hit 230 reasonable. I think the problem is he's streaky. He will always be streaky. And even with the gains he's made cutting down on the Ks, I mean, he's a streaky hitter. And you know, I don't know if you talked to Jeff about this, but you know, they asked him comments on who's going to play center between Moniak and Adele. And it looks like, and rightly so, it's going to be not a strict platoon. He's going to want to see which guy emerges. So the fear with that is you may not see Adele every day. You may see him probably closer to the bottom of the lineup, like 7 or 8. But, you know, if he shows out and gets hot, obviously leave him in there for that. But that's what he's going to need, and he's going to need it quickly because Moniak is kind of, in a weird way, a similar player. In a lot of ways, doesn't look like a major league hitter, but goes on streaks, can get streakier. Certainly, Odell's got a better profile in terms of power, but Moniak is obviously a left-handed hitter. So all things being equal, maybe he gets more righties, but there's not enough space for the two of them, and only one of them's going to play.
Well, the only way that they have space, the only way they have space for the two of them is if Trout gets hurt.
Why would you do that, Mike? We
Don't
don't
put that in
need
the
your
universe.
help. We don't need your help. I mean, and even Soler, who obviously is a very, very smart pick this year, is he really going to DH every day? Is O'Hoppe going to DH sometimes if he's hot? But they need to give him a day off from behind the plate. So I think the risk with Adele is, I think the playing time risk and the cold streaks are real. And for that reason, I thought at first that he was underpriced, maybe a little, but he 250 to 260 is kind of the right price for somebody with his upside. But hard to say. And as far as spring stats, somebody mentioned to me, his spring stat doesn't matter. I don't understand for hitters why anybody weights anything. I mean, I'd rather my guy is getting, Mason Wynn is the perfect profile for somebody you want to see in spring stats.
Right.
The luck will change, and he got all his bad luck out of the way. So I just laugh when people point to hitting stats. Like, yeah, if a guy's trying to earn a job, but Adele is going to get starts. It's just, can he start fast enough? Because he's going to lose PT fast, because he's not a guy anymore that's like, oh, we got to give him some rope. We got to let him develop. He's close to being a veteran now, and he's got to earn his keep. And we almost traded him a few times. So it's risk, but at that price, big deal.
Yeah. Interesting thing. You're talking about spring training stats, and here's an interesting thing that I noticed about Adele, and I don't recall any other time that I've seen this. So he has 58 plate appearances this spring. To your point, he's hitting a robust 164, 3 home runs and 12 RBIs and a stolen base. But his BABIP is actually lower than his batting average. His BABIP is 158. I don't know that I've ever seen that before.
That's I think Mason Wins is like 133. I think he might have him beat or something.
Yeah, but it's just really interesting. And Jeff did agree on that idea that the Adele Moniak platoon situation is not really going to be a platoon, and that Washington will play the hot hand. I don't see any reason why, if Adele gets decent playing time, he can't hit 20 home runs and steal 10 bases at the very least. Batting average 230, 240, somewhere in there. What do you guys think about Adele, real quick?
I like his upside. I know we were talking earlier this week about him. I like his upside. I like the power speed potential there. I was actually worried about his spring stats, but then I looked at it and his K percentage was still what it was last year, right, when he had lowered it. So what my worries there were, like, they were disappeared right away. I do worry that he is at the bottom of the lineup, but I know Ron Washington loves him and he talks highly of him, and he says he's got like little things that he needs to fix. So I think the potential is there, and he's always had that high upside. So, and like Dan said, at the price you're paying, it's definitely worth it.
Chris, how about you? What do you think about Adele? Do you have shares of him somewhere?
Yeah, I'll be honest. Like, I'm listening to you guys talk about him, and I'm having some FOMO, because I don't have any Adele. Just not a guy that I've considered really at any point. And maybe that's just a blind spot for me, because I'm looking now. I mean, yeah, the K percentage is relatively high. Last year it was at 28%. But, we talk about his BABIP during spring. I mean, even last year, his BABIP was 244. Now, I don't think Joe Adele necessarily, like, there's anything in his profile that suggests he should be having a BABIP in that range, right? It seemed like the year before, it looks like, well, it wasn't much of a sample size, but it looks like he's more like traditionally kind of league average BABIP, and last year was 244. I don't know. I think he's due for some regression there. I did have some questions around PT, but now I'm thinking about it, like, You got Trout. You got, I mean, he could win the job outright over Moniak. That's a possibility. But there are a lot of injury risks in that outfield, right? You've got Trout. Soler doesn't have the best injury track record. Taylor Ward doesn't have the best injury track record.
Right.
I'm actually, now that I'm really thinking about it, I may jump into DC right now just to go get some Joe Adell.
Well, you do that, Chris, because we're going to take a quick ad break here, and we'll be right back with Dan and Chris and Dave in a couple of minutes. All right, we are back, and we have come to our favorite part of the program tonight, which is where we're going to grill Torres about his recent drafts that he's done. Now, Chris and I both this past weekend were lucky enough to participate in Tout. We did not get a chance to see each other because we were drafting on different days, unfortunately. And he had a draft on Saturday that he was doing separate from Tout. And I had friends in the area that I was visiting with over the weekend. But we both were able to participate in it. Chris, what were your initial impressions of Tout quickly?
I mean, it was awesome to be a part of it. I went in there with really like just kind of flying by the seat of my pants, honestly. I've never done, this was a head-to-head points league.
Right.
So I've never done this format. I've been strictly either 12 team or 15 team roto for I don't know how many years. However long I've been playing fantasy. It's been a long time. And so I just went in and really was like, I am going to draft off of like I put in my settings, the league settings into my draft software, and really had that kind of spit out some dollar values and really went off of that. So it really like, first of all, I had a main event the day before, so I just didn't have time, you know? So yeah, I mean, it was cool. It was exhausted. By the end of it, I was exhausted.
Yes, it's very draining. It's a very draining experience. Yeah.
Yep. So, but yeah, let's get into it.
Well, I wanted to ask you quickly because as I looked at your team, you know, you were sending us, pictures and whatever on Sunday morning when you were doing that draft. I was at my friend's house and I was watching the live, live stream of it or whatever they call it, and was taking a look at it, and it was pretty interesting. I wanted to ask you, Chris, and not a criticism at all, but I wanted to ask, was your strategy really to build around having a couple of really high OBP guys? Because I noticed that you took Juan Soto and Vlad Guerrero at prices that I thought were pretty reasonable. Was that your strategy kind of going in? I know that you have you love to build in the two catcher leagues. You love to really get two excellent catchers as well. Talk a little bit about what your strategy was. I know you didn't have a lot of time to kind of think about that, but I'm guessing that you had kind of a bare bones strategy that you went into with it.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to go and just get like two big bats right at the start. And Soto and Vlad were kind of at the beginning there. And I just wanted to lock those guys in. It wasn't even a matter of OBP. Just I just wanted stud hitters. So locked in Soto and Vlad. And I ended up taking both Contreras brothers, which I can't say it was the plan to get both of them specifically, but I knew that I wanted to get two everyday catchers. And the reason for that, I feel like, especially in the 12-team league, I feel like that gives you such a big advantage. You know, I'm looking at other teams that are starting guys like, you know, that are part-timers, you know, Joey Bart and, you know, Ivan Herrera. We don't know, like, is he going to play all the time? So I'm getting, I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm getting like an extra 250 to 300 plate appearances with getting those guys that are literally going to play every day. And in the points league, it just intuitively made sense to me. Like, you want volume, right? Like that's, you're not thinking as much about categories or balancing or do I need this or that? It's like, I just need volume, and getting those two catchers up top, I feel like just gives you such an advantage right off the bat. You know, it's not you know, I'm probably a little weak in outfield.
Agreed.
There are going to be guys, though, in a 12-team league, there are going to be players that come out on the waiver wire that are going to be, you know, whether they're injury replacements or whatever. Like, I can find volume at outfield. But in a two-catcher league, even in a 12-teamer, who's coming available on the waiver wire that's going to be close to what either of the Contreras brothers are going to be getting in terms of playing time. Like,
Yeah,
it's not going to happen.
I really liked your idea there, because the one thing that I had neglected to recognize is that I'm in the mixed auction, which is 15 teams, and you were in the head-to-head points, which is a little bit different animal.
Mhm.
And when I didn't realize that going into it, and I was like, oh, there's the bold two catcher strategy, because you kind of drafted a couple of guys and then you kind of sat pat for a while, as I was kind of watching it, which I understood fully. I really like that idea of going after the two catchers there, because I can tell you, having been in tout last year, when my catchers got hurt, I didn't have good catchers to start. I had Gabriel Moreno, who I liked, but then Luis Campusano did not end up getting a full-time job, and I lost at bats because of that, to your point. So trying to fill that gap all year, I was constantly chasing that, and it didn't work. So I really liked what you did there. Dave, you were going to ask Chris about and any questions about any surprises that he might have had while he was drafting there.
Yeah, going in, I know you mentioned, you didn't really plan on anyone in particular, but was there anything that happened that was a surprise to you? Any player values either that you got or that someone else got that was a big surprise to you that helped you shape your team as to what it is?
As far as my team, nothing really. Well, I did get Clay Holmes for $9, and the reason I really like Clay Holmes, as many people do, especially after the spring that he's had. But one of the advantages of having Clay Holmes is that he is designated as a relief pitcher. And in this league, which I didn't even realize, again, zero prep, you know, the Trump gif where you say, like, I had no plan, I had no strategy. That was me, so like halfway
you need to work on your Trump impression.
I'm working on it. If you have a better one, please feel free. But with Clay Holmes, I realized you could put him in as a relief pitcher. And I know you're going to ask me about closers, so I'll cut to the chase here. If you can plug in a guy like a Clay Holmes or Chris Bubich, who I ended up getting later, or Grant Holmes even, who were eligible at relief pitcher last year and are carrying that over, you could just put those in and you don't need closers because it's a points league, right? So, and I think that's safer because I don't know, like, what if my closer only gets into one game that week, right? And he's only giving me 1 inning or 2 innings or whatever, whereas I can be confident I'm at least getting 1 start per week from those other guys. So I got Clay Holmes for $9, ended up getting Bubich for $4, and those are going to be my relief pitchers. I also got Tanner Scott just because he was $3. So I couldn't pass that up. So yeah, that was, I was a little surprised because I figured other people would, like be in on that, and nobody was. So that was a little bit of a surprise. One thing that I'm kicking myself for is Spencer Strider. I was surprised how cheap he went because this is a league with unlimited ILs, which I kind of hate, to be honest with you. But I should have taken better advantage of that because a guy like Strider, you put on your IL, you can replace him with somebody. Again, it's a 12-teamer, so the replacement value is better. Strider ended up going to Nick Pollock for $10. So like that's such a smash, man. Wow. I mean that I was kicking myself afterward that I didn't get in on the bidding there. So that was a big surprise for me to see him go.
Were you out of money, or were you at a point where you just couldn't spend, or were you just more concerned about?
I think I had already. I can't remember exactly, but I was like kind of. I was figuring how much money I had left, and I'm like, okay, I have this much money for this spot, and then kind of like I just was in a position where I really couldn't spend on another pitcher, and even though it was only $10, like I had it allocated for other areas. So
yeah, and it can be tough to spend money you don't know you have on someone you don't know when they'll be back. I don't know if at this time we knew that he was going to be pitching at the time that, like, on that Monday, but
yeah, I mean, after he pitched on Monday, now, he would have been more expensive. But even still, like, I knew that he was probably coming back early May, right? Yeah. And maybe the timeline has moved up now. But yeah, that was that was not a good not a good move by me.
It's going to be really interesting to see how he moves up, and there'll be a lot of drafts this weekend, and I'm guessing that there's going to be a really high price on him. Dan, just to get you into the conversation here, what do you think about Strider? Is that somebody that you're interested in? Any drafts that you're doing right now?
I mean, up until the more recent, obvious FOMO and seeing it, aren't we, if we're expecting him to be close to what he is, aren't we asking for him to be the exception to the rule on TJ, even with the new improved, whatever it's called? I'm blanking on
internal brace.
The internal brace surgery. Yeah.
Like, I know what that means. So my instinct, my gut is to say that's still pretty high for a guy that's going to miss most of a month. And we don't know, one string training start does not make a pitcher. Otherwise, Casey Mize would have been a beast last year.
Right.
So not that I'm trying to compare the two, but I got the FOMO. If he's there around pick 90, I would definitely take him now, but you got to take him around 60. And I could see why people do it because the pool does get a little muddled at that point. I don't know if I can pull the trigger, man. It's a maybe, but when I look at the builds and how I'd like to do teams like that, he'd have to be my second starter. And I don't know if I'm willing to take a second starter that soon, given the way the player pool this year is so bereft of, guys with average that can give you, decent power. It really drops off big. So if it wasn't for that, then I might be willing to do it. But other than the kind of FOMO angle, I just still can't see it.
I hear you.
Great, but it's not like. I mean, I don't know. And by the way, the last thing that I'd hate on with that is nobody's talking about the team that he faced when he put up those numbers. It doesn't count.
True. Yeah.
Very good point. Very good point.
But yeah, but I mean, I'm like everybody else. I'm FOMO. You're reaching for the stars. You think you're going to get something big, and it's freaking Strider. But I just honestly, I have a real trouble doing it before pick 75. It's kind of to give you my read on it.
Totally makes sense.
That's more gut than anything, man. That's not statistics that's telling me that. So,
Torres, I wanted to just say one thing before we move on from your Tout Wars team. I really liked your strategy. I thought your philosophy was really good. And you didn't just take one reliever. You did take Chris Martin from Coldplay in a sky full of stars before you got out of there for the draft. So I had to make a Chris Martin joke. It seems like nobody does that in podcasts, and they should do that more often.
You only got a couple years left to do it. So, I can't imagine he's around much longer.
He's 39. So, so Chris, wanted to talk with you also, shifting gears real quick here to your main event team. And your main event team, the more I looked at it, the more I really liked what you did. And I wanted to ask you, you started in the main event with Lindor, then you went Jazz, and then you went Michael Harris. And then you went Raisel Iglesias and Spencer Schwellenbach. Now, obviously a high emphasis on Atlanta Braves there, but talk about the decision to go bat heavy first and then build your staff around Schwellenbach.
Yeah, that was the plan going in, was to kind of do an early starting pitcher fade. And I can't say that was the right I really don't know. I'm doing two mains this year. So I think my second main, I probably won't take the same approach. But yeah, I just, when I kind of played out the draft, after I got my draft slot, kind of played out like, all right, who are some of the players that are going to be available to me later? And, I kind of like to draft from, like draft backwards in a sense, see who's going to be there later and see, kind of fill out my draft that way. And every time I kind of went through like all 30 rounds and looking at, what my team might look like, I just felt like I was coming up short in offense. And, I also look back a couple years ago, my first main event, actually, which was the best I ever did, was exactly my strategy, was to go in and fade starting pitching. At the time, I was working for Razzball, and they're kind of like famous for that, like fade starting pitching, and I kind of subscribed to that idea at the time, and actually did, had my best finish doing that. And that year was, I I took Luis Castillo as my ace, and that was the year he was actually bad. So I made it work, and I've traditionally been able to make it work with pitching, working the waiver wire, finding the 2-start guys, and just kind of like finessing my way to finish, fairly high in pitching. So I figured, let me lock in the top 3 bats here. I love Jazz in the second round. I understand there's risk there, but the more I thought about it, like, there's just so few players in the pool that have that legit. I mean, he's projected for 25 home runs and close to 40 stolen bases. So this guy has 30 home runs, 50 stolen bases in his range of outcomes, right? The other piece that I think makes Jazz so valuable, especially in a 15-teamer, he's already got the third base outfield, right? We know he's going to pick up second base in season. That's, like, to me, like the queen piece, right? Like, where you could move all over the board. Like, I think that's so valuable and opens up so many options later in the draft. So yeah, I love getting Jazz in the second round there. I took him, I think, what did I have? Pick 19. And then, pairing him with Lindor and Harris, I felt like I had a really solid foundation of power and speed. Batting average, I think one thing that if I had to go back, like, I felt like I needed to address that a little bit more, because I didn't really get. Harris is a good average guy, but I didn't get like that anchor, right? That batting average anchor that's gonna, potentially be a 300 hitter. So that's probably one weakness of mine. And my pitching, I think if you look at it, you say there's risk, there's skills, but there's risk there. So, I probably could have used another safe arm.
So going on to your pitching now, you took Schwellenbach and Wu, and then you got Sanchez and Kikuchi as your base, which is pretty good. And then later you added some upside with Casey Mize, Jack Leiter, and Bubic again. But you went with starters without without records, like long track records. So is that something that you were planning to do? Is that a strategy you were planning to do? Or is that something that you might want to change if you could go back?
No, that was kind of the strategy. And if you take a look at most of those pitchers are guys who have had really good spring trainings. And we talked with Thomas Nestico last week about this. And just looking at some of these guys who have really stood out in spring training. And part of my philosophy, again, I don't know if this is right, but my mindset right now is we are better now at predicting, like, we have more data to go off of in spring training, right? Like, I think can really inform us and help us better predict some of these breakout pitchers. And I looked at what, Schwellenbach, everybody's on, right? And I had no shares of him. And that was a little bit of a FOMO pick, but I do really believe in him. I mean, there are no chinks in the armor with Schwellenbach. And you saw yesterday, I mean, dominated in spring training. He had 10 strikeouts. So I feel good. I'm fine with him as my ace. Brian Wu, looked at what he was doing in spring training, and I kind of went back to September of last year and looked at some of the changes that he appeared to be making and the improved skills that he had. So to me, it was like, Brian Wu, I understand there's some injury risk to be cognizant of with him, but I really feel that, like, he could really put it all together and take that next step this year. Talked about Christopher Sanchez last week. I mean, the increased velocity. I was in on Sanchez before spring training. Now I'm paying a premium, but I believe I think the increased velocity, I think he's basically Framber Valdez that you're getting several rounds later.
It's a really great comp.
Yeah, I mean, if you pull up their skills, they're really not much different. So yeah, I am all in on Sanchez this year. Kikuchi, we talked about. I felt he was going too late. Even I took him higher than ADP because I just didn't have any other options that I loved in that round. But I'm like, let me just lock in Kikuchi. I feel like, his strikeouts, if you look just at his underlying, like we talked about Sierra, right? And some of these like ERA estimators, Kikuchi was top 15 last year, and pitched a full. I mean, he's been one of the healthiest pitchers over the past few years. So if you're getting a guy who has been, relatively safe from an innings perspective and has been safe from a skills perspective. I mean, I know he has a little bit of a home run problem, but at pick like 160, I'll take that, especially in mains where pitching tends to really get pushed up.
Sure.
He's not getting pushed up for whatever reason. So I was totally fine with Kikuchi there. Ended up taking Bubic, Casey Mize, Matt Boyd, and Jack Leiter to round out my rotation. And yeah, I mean, that was part of the strategy. Like you said, Dave, like getting these guys that maybe don't have as many innings. I really want skills. And I think all of those guys have the skills that I'm looking for. And I could fill in later. Like, let's say Bubic only gives me 120, 130 innings. Like, I'm confident in my ability to find replacements that are going to help me fill in those missing innings.
Well, let's talk about your missing infield real quick.
Hey. You're gonna get me upset with this.
No.
Infield. I saw what you wrote in the outline. Not cool.
I did. Well, I just was wondering. Obviously, your pitching staff. What you did is awesome. I mean, you got a ton of upside, a ton of really great stuff going on there. But you started with Lindor and Jazz, who are obviously two huge building blocks, but ended up with the rest of your infield being Paul Goldschmidt, Brendan Donovan, and Otto Lopez. Do you think that's a spot where you're going to have to spend some fab?
No.
Why do you think that you won't?
That's his poker face. Is that what we're looking at?
Bro, you're obviously not on the Otto Lopez train
or the Paul Goldschmidt train.
I don't quite understand what you're missing with him.
I like Brendan Donovan.
Okay. So, but why don't you like Otto Lopez? It's not that I don't like him.
I'm just wondering. That's all.
I got him round. I believe it was round 24. So we're talking like
that's
well into the 300s here. I'm not good with math, but I think it's in the 300s. Yeah, I'm terrible with that. Like if somebody tells me like, oh, they got this person in whatever round, like it really takes me a long time to figure out what number that is. So that's a story for another day. But you don't need to be good at math to be good at fantasy baseball. So Otto Lopez, he's a guy that's going to play every day. Elite defense. So who the hell is going to play second base for the Marlins besides him, right? So he's got an everyday job. He last year stole 20 bases and 434 plate appearances. All of the contact, he batted 270, but I don't really care. Like I'm not looking at batting average. I'm looking at underlying like the contact rate and everything. Like that's much more informative. And last year he had an 87% zone contact, 80% contact rate, which is well above average.
Mm-hmm.
He's aggressive in the zone. Like I think that 270 average, let me just look at his projection. Okay. The Bad X has him for a 267 average. All the other ones, Steamer has him at 278.
Mm-hmm.
To define late batting average that also could provide steals, that also plays every day. Where am I going wrong? Why do I need to replace Otto Lopez? He's an everyday player, and I'm good with it, man.
I don't know that you need to replace him. I feel like the projections for him are showing that he's not an everyday player, and he's going to hit 5 home runs. I mean, that
might be a problem. That
was the only question that I had. It's not that I don't like him as a player. I didn't know. Like, let's face facts, right? We all know this going in. You're going to always have something that's got to give when you're drafting, right? Like you're never going to get it covered all the way. And you spent great on pitching and probably won't even have to touch that for maybe the whole season. And if Otto Lopez turns out to rake and he ends up playing 140 games, you're probably in great shape. The question that I had was just like with what you started with, was that part of the strategy too, really, to just kind of say, okay, I'm going to get these 2 anchors, I'm going to build pitching, and then I'm going to kind of fill in with what's left.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of Otto, so he's been a target of mine. Just again because of the price, I just felt like it's hard to find that combination of batting average and stolen bases late. So, the other thing too is that Jazz is eligible at second base. So
that's true. That's a great point.
There's flexibility that I have, and that was part of the appeal of drafting him. So maybe Otto becomes my middle infielder. So I'm totally fine with that. Listen, I think we're underselling. I think the projections are underselling him a little bit on the power.
Could be.
if you look at his underlying like hard hit rate, he had a 38.4% hard hit rate, which is actually fine. It's really that's pretty close to average. A 5% barrel rate. Like if you compare him, I actually did this, and I'm not saying he's Mason Wynn, but if you look at their underlying stats or their like, some of the underlying metrics, they're not that different, and we're taking Mason Wynn in the early 100s. So
yeah, and you're really skilled at that. I mean, to give you a compliment, I mean, you're really skilled at finding guys that are going later in drafts that are similar to guys that have a lot of helium to them. So I think that that's a really good strategy that you use. And you know that I'm just giving you a hard time. I have no problem with Otto Lopez.
I'm glad you brought it up because anytime I get to stand for Otto. But yeah, the other thing too is that with Donovan, the Otto pick, I also got Alejandro Kirk. I recognized, like, once I got to pick around 200, I'm like, oh crap, like my batting average is hurting.
Yeah, sure.
So and I'll be honest, like if I could do it over again, I would have been a little bit more proactive earlier, because you never want to find yourself in that position where you're like, find you're deficient in something.
Right.
But those picks were a little bit of my solution. And let me tell you my last pick, because I want everybody who's listening to pay attention to this last pick that I made.
Here we go.
Your boy, Brandon Drury, cleanup hitter for the Chicago White Sox. If you were in, he's not a 12-team play at this point, but if you are in an AL only or a 15-team league and you're listening to this podcast, I want you to write this down. Save your last pick for Brandon Drury. Don't forget, I know he had a bad year last year, but he was hurt. The 2 years prior to that, Brandon Drury was a 26 home run, 80 RBI hitter. And now we don't care about him.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he had a bad year last year, I mean, again, I think we could chalk up to injuries. But the fact that he was able to find what I think is going to be full-time playing time with the White Sox, especially now that Josh Rojas is hurt.
Yeah,
bro,
he's got it.
I'm all over it.
He's got a hit, but that could well happen. And the White Sox do have a bit of a logjam in that spot. I think what they're hoping is that Drury kind of recaptures some of what he was, because he's not that far removed from it, and that they might be able to use him as a trade piece later on, because he's keeping the spot warm for a couple of other younger guys. But he's hit very well in spring training, to your point. I don't think he's going to back clean it for the White Sox. Those of you who are listening, that's a grandiose claim.
Thank you. I need people to keep me in check.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm going to tell you something right now. This is not grandiose. This is fact. This is fact. You were reading my Twitter the other day, so you should get on that.
Yeah, a little busy.
I tweeted a chart, and the chart was of bat speed leaders in spring training.
Mm-hmm.
Brandon Drury's bat speed in spring training is faster than Aaron Judge's.
Yeah, I saw that. I just chose not to comment on it because I didn't want to give you the satisfaction. Because I know what I'm gonna get all summer. Brandon Drury is your best guy. Here we go. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, Chris, you did a great job on your drafts. Thanks for sharing those with us. I know that we really enjoy talking about that stuff, and you did a really nice job. We're going to take one more ad break, and then we're going to be coming back with our mental health minute. Stay tuned. Okay, and we're back, and we are going to head to the final segment of our show, which is my favorite segment that we do in the entire show, other than when Torres is doing his impersonation of crazed Times Square maniacs talking about Brandon Drury. We are going to talk about mental health minute. I'm going to turn it over to Dave first. Dave, what are you doing this week to kind of help your mental and physical wellness? I want to say before we start that this is a hard time of year historically for a lot of people, with spring coming and mood disorders and all the different things that go on. So we always want to be sure that we end talking about mental health, especially for men who don't really talk about this. Dave, I know you've had a really long and trying week working in school, as I have. What are you doing right now to take better care of yourself?
Yeah, I know I said that at the beginning of the show that I'm having a rough week. And honestly, what I'm doing is I'm trying to enjoy the people that I'm around. Now, I mean that as like the people that I work with. So like at work, I'm surrounded by a tremendous group of people who, we can laugh about things. We can go to each other for help. We can, we're just there to cover each other if something happens. And I'm pretty grateful for that. And I'm pretty grateful that, throughout our text messages, you guys are there for me, even if it's just about baseball or whatever. And the fact that we can come here once a week and talk about baseball, it just helps to, alleviate any stress that might be happening elsewhere. So honestly, I'm really trying to be grateful and enjoy the people and the time that I have with them.
That's great, Dave. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Chris, how about you? I know it's been a hard couple of weeks for you too. You've been really busy. What are you doing to take care of yourself?
Well, listen, man, you helped me out tremendously this week by taking over the show, doing the outline, hosting, so my mental health minute, or the thing that I'm doing, is just paying attention to when I need help and asking for help. And I reached out to you and said, hey, can you take care of this week? I'm running on fumes here. And, you were gracious enough to do that. You killed it, by the way. So awesome job. But yeah, just like in the past, I've had a hard time admitting when I can't do something. Like I just have this mentality, like I can take everything on, and just have this kind of like do it all mentality. And that's helped me, right? Like it's helped me do certain things, but it also has been detrimental at times where I just burn out, and for me, like sometimes it's like physically, like I just start, like I'll have, my stomach will be screwed up or get a migraine, that's like my body telling me, slow down, man. Like you gotta take it easy. And this past week, I think I did a better job of doing that, and appreciate you helping me out. And
Well, happy to do it. It's a team, and we all have to take different parts on the team sometimes and step up and take a step back at times when it's needed too. So I appreciate the kind words, but it was my pleasure to do it, and happy to be able to participate on this team. For me, I think just to be kind of quick about it this week, it has been a very trying week for all three of us, and it's something that we've been tossing about in our group chat as we go through the whole week. I'm trying to really just make sure that I take things as they come and not try to put too much spin or emphasis on things that I don't have any control over. The weather here has been putrid. I told you guys this morning that we woke up to 3 inches of snow. It's the first day of spring. Outside baseball is canceled. Obviously, it's a real detriment to trying to get things done. I'm on a really tight schedule, as we all are, trying to fit all these things in. And today I kind of had that aha moment where I'm like, I need to take a deep breath and just recognize that I don't have any control over what the weather is. I live outside Chicago. It's 35 degrees and there's 3 inches of snow on the ground. I can't change that. I can put a jacket on. I can go out to my car and start the car and let it warm up a little bit. I still got to take out the trash. I still got to get Jack to his ortho appointment. I still got to get Ellie to work. Those things never change. So those are things that I can control. The only thing that I can control in all that is my attitude towards the stuff that's going on. I can't change it necessarily. So I'm trying to do that and go with the flow. We have one more week until we're on spring break. I'm going to be in Florida with family over spring break, the last week of March into the early April there. And I'm hoping that's going to be a time for me to be able to recharge my batteries and just kind of shift into neutral and just hang out for a little bit. But then after that, it's that sprint to the finish line for graduation and the end of the school year. And then I get a little bit of a break to kind of catch my breath before we head into the summer school year, which is part of what I do for my job as well. So my advice to people is to just take things as it comes. Try to relax a little bit and kind of quiet the mind. The mind starts getting really talkative this time of year. Hey, what would be really cool is if we did this, or, I'm really down and I'm feeling this way. I mean, we hear about that stuff all the time. Take care of yourselves, do the best that you can, keep things in perspective on a daily basis. And unlike Chris Torres talking about taking Chris Martin, don't listen to Coldplay if you don't have to. It's a strong recommendation from me. I can't say it strongly enough. With that, guys, we'll wrap it up for this week. Dave, you mentioned earlier that we are heading towards episode 100 pretty soon, huh? Sometime this summer.
Yeah, if my math is correct, which it may not be, it's coming up in a few months. So if
Well, you do teach kindergarten, so you don't have to count that high usually, so that's good.
yeah, that's
No, but we're really happy to be part of your week, and we hope that you'll listen this weekend with some coffee and have a great day. And thank you so much for joining us. We are the Fantasy Baseball Beat, and for Chris Torres and Dave Funnel, I am Mike Carter with the worst Twitter handle of all time, signing off for this week. We'll catch you on the upside. If you have anything that you need in the meantime, hit us on the DMs or whatever they call them on X now, and we will be there for you guys. Take care and peace.